Welcome to Family.Inc. Expert Interviews. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Mindy Goodall, from a trust officer at Expedition Trust. Today's discussion is titled Ensuring Continuity, Trust Management Tips for Family Business Owners. Before we begin, a little housekeeping. If you have any questions throughout the session, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Mindy, welcome.
Great. Hi, Josh. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Before we get started on trust, a little background on yourself and Expedition, just so everyone has some context on where we're coming from.
Absolutely. I have been with Expedition Trust Company for the past 4.5 years. Before that, like many of us, I had a varied career. I started off, studied finance back in the day, and actually started off my career in consulting. I worked for, and I'm going to show my age because it was called Anderson Consulting back in the days. Now known as Accenture,
Right.
up in the DC area. Worked for two other smaller consulting firms after that before moving here to Charlottesville, Virginia, and did some light consulting work while I was raising my kids, and then actually got into the nonprofit world and ran the Charlottesville Police Foundation for 10 years, doing a variety of things. And it was super exciting work and super challenging work. And then, like I said, 4.5 years ago, and it's funny, Josh, the timing of it was I was talking to the folks at Expedition for about a year before we decided for me to join on. And the date that we picked was March the 16th, 2020, which happens to be the date that the world shut down because of COVID.
Yeah.
So, but we came to work. Yeah, we came to work every day. We have three of us here in the Charlottesville office with Expedition. We are a South Dakota chartered trust company. And so we actually have 3 employees out in Pierre, South Dakota. It looks like Pierre, it's the state capital. But yes, the locals call it Pierre, so we call it Pierre as well. Yeah, and Expedition was founded 10 years ago. And it was founded by a group of people that wanted a trust company for a number of different reasons. Our founders had a variety of reasons, including wanting a trust company for their own families and their own trusts, as well as thinking this was a great business opportunity. And so we were founded with the idea of offering high-touch personal trustee services and estate settlement services to our clients. I can speak more about this later, but we do not manage money. We like to think of ourselves as an old-fashioned trust company. This is the way trust companies used to be, where they really just offered trustee services without the money management piece of it. And we have grown from 0 assets under administration to over 800 million in our 10 years. And our book of business keeps growing, and we are providing excellent service to our clients.
Thank you. Perfect. Good. And I love, so we got connected for those who are watching in Charlottesville, obviously, have bumped into each other through my work with families and your work with families. So I'm glad we could marry this up and have this conversation, because trusts are coming up in every one of my conversations with families that I'm having, especially right now as the lifetime exemption looks to sunset at the end of the year. So it's
That's right.
opportune time.
Absolutely. This is a big year for a lot of reasons. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So we're seeing that with clients coming into our office as well, wondering, we don't know what's going to be happening, what laws will be passed and which ones won't be. And no one has the answers, but there's still some good estate planning to be done in this time.
Yep. Good. So for those of you who are watching who have extensive experience in sort of the trust realm, bear with us for a second. Let's go one-on-one for a minute and talk about the dynamics between or the terminology, trustee, beneficiaries, trust protectors. Like walk us through that to begin, and some of perhaps the different types of trusts, and then we can jump in and go down some rabbit holes.
That's great. And stop me at any point in time if I'm going too fast or making it too complicated or too simple. But a little trust 101 is, there are many, many different types of trusts, but most trusts have the following components, and they are a grantor. The grantor is the person that is responsible for establishing the trust and contributing the trust assets to the trust. The Beneficiary is the person that is going to receive the benefit from the trust. And, that can be income distributions, that can be lump sums, that can be, I mean, there's many different standards of what the beneficiary can receive from the trust, and that's written in the trust document. And then there is the trustee who has the management of the trust to provide protection for the assets that are in the trust, as well as managing them and overseeing them and having the fiduciary responsibility for the trust. We like to say it's kind of like when you're mailing a letter. If you think about it, there's the person who, puts the letter in the envelope and it's their letter, and that is the grantor. And then they give it to the post office to hopefully take care of it in the interim until it ends up to the final destination. The analogy breaks down if anyone's had any issues
It
with the
was totally
postal
that
service.
simple, right?
We like to think we're a lot more responsible than the post office, but that the
That's right.
post office would be the trustee in this analogy,
Yeah.
who takes the letter. It is not ours. It is our responsibility to take care of it until we give it to the beneficiary, to the person who receives the letter. So that can be a helpful analogy for people. And obviously, there can be people involved in those examples, as well as entities, charities, and institutions, and many different things. And that's maybe a good segue, unless you have questions, into types of trusts.
Yeah, before we go there,
Mhm.
why would somebody do this? Why is somebody creating the trust in the first place? And then we can jump into the types of trust, because I think that's an easier launch pad for
Right.
that.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to be annoying and say there are so many different reasons. It's complicated as to why people might create trust, but I'll give just a few examples. But just know that there are so many reasons why someone might decide to create a trust. Someone might try to create or might create a trust in an effort to avoid probate. Probate is after a person dies, their assets go through a system that is public in the courts, to be able to determine where all of their assets are going to go. It can be expensive, it can be time consuming, and obviously it is not a private process. And so if you have created let's say, a revocable trust during the time of your life, when you die, it turns into an irrevocable trust, and then the assets can be distributed per the terms of the trust. And that can be a private process and a much faster process. And we serve that role as trustee as well. To be able to just facilitate that process. So it doesn't, in that type of situation, it doesn't necessarily have to be an extremely wealthy individual who is creating that trust. It can be just kind of to avoid that probate process. And then after the trust assets are distributed, then there is no trust after that sometimes. Now, you also can create a trust during your lifetime that does not completely distribute out at your death. There can be trusts that are created for the benefit of people or charities after that time, and those trusts can be ongoing after your death. You can create trust because you want to get some assets out of your estate. Maybe you're bumping up against estate taxes. And if you create an irrevocable trust during your lifetime, then you can get those assets out of your estate and avoid or reduce the amount of the state tax that you would need to pay. You
Mhm.
also might want to create a trust for asset protection. People can create prenuptial agreements, but all the lawyers that we work with say trusts are better than prenups. They stand up better, and they're a better vehicle to protect your assets, not just from divorce, but also from creditors.
Yeah.
A lot of people who have closely held family businesses also put those assets into a trust. And that can be a good way to still be involved. And we can get into that later, with different types of trusts, and have control of your company, but have it out of your estate and have some protection over those assets and over those family businesses. You can create a trust for special needs individuals, for charities. There are many, many different reasons why somebody might create a trust.
Yeah. So the avoiding the probate process, obviously getting those assets out of your estate so that it's not visible. and you don't have to deal with the court system. We're looking at taxes, and mitigating estate taxes at the end of the
Mhm.
day, protecting those assets in one way, shape, or form. And then the list goes on and on and on. I think
Right.
most people are looking at this as saying, okay, how do I keep it out of my estate for probate? How am I looking at
Mhm.
this as a tax tool in many
Mhm.
ways? And setting the next generation up for success by creating some sort of structure versus just passing wealth straight down to their children.
Right. Like even personally, my husband and I, we have a revocable trust for us. And when our kids were a little bit younger, we had a lot of terms in the trust that said, you know, don't, there's a trustee, do not give the money to our children before the age of X. Give them a third at, maybe 25 or 30 years old, give them another third at another age. And we gave the trustee great discretion to make sure that, you know, can you imagine getting a big lump of money as you're about to head off to college at 18 years old? What that might do to different personalities. I mean, everybody's different, but money can really be a demotivating factor. And I think a lot of people recognize some wisdom of having this be a phased approach if someone is going to be inheriting some money. We like to say, and because I am a mother, that we want to put some guardrails sometimes on certain beneficiaries. I think everyone benefits from having guardrails. Some people very much need guardrails more than others. And we my husband and I recently did redo our estate plans and took off a few of those guardrails because
Yeah.
our children have gotten older and we've realized, gosh, they have, they're on a really good path. But some of our clients also, there are a lot of different needs. There's mental health issues, there are some addiction issues, there are different reasons why it might be very wise to keep guardrails on even for longer. And some of our beneficiaries who struggle in different ways have actually told us this is saving my life. Like as much as I sometimes wish I had all of this money in my pocket, it's a really good thing that I don't.
Yeah.
And so we're able to help out, and that's another reason why grantors may choose to do this. Is just to, help guide the next generation.
Yep. Let's, I want to pivot to types of trust for just a second.
Okay.
Um, Revocable, irrevocable. Let's break down some of the larger buckets, just so everyone has context for the differences and why you might choose one or over the other.
Yes, absolutely. So, and once again, this is not holistic of all the different reasons of why you would want to choose one or the other, but I'll just give
We've
some.
got that's a day-long course.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is just the 101
Primer,
class. Yes,
primer.
exactly, the primer. And we work with a lot of really great estate planning attorneys who are experts in this, especially with the changing tax laws. And so, if you want to go into a deep dive, that's a good place to go also. But a revocable trust, you can hear it in the name. You can revoke it. You can easily change it, like my husband and I just did with our plan. And so while you are alive, if you create a revocable living trust, as some people call them, you can be changing it over the course of time as your situation changes. And an irrevocable trust would require a lot more work to change. They are not impossible to change. We actually, it's called decanting. If you think about decanting wine, changing it and trying to remove some things from it and make it into a slightly different type of trust, or taking out some provisioners or adding provisions, that can be done, but it requires some legal action to do that, whether it's court orders or amendments to the trust. And
Mhm.
so you want to think about like along with that. So if you think about a revocable trust, it's easier to change, but it also doesn't have as much protection as as an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust will offer you more things. It's kind of like the risk and return type of graph, and so it will offer you things that a revocable trust will not offer. So depending on your situation, you would pick one or the other, as well as a lot of people have both. So you could have an irrevocable trust that has certain assets in it, as well as having a revocable trust that has maybe the remainder of your assets that you still, things are changing throughout your life, and you're going to have the benefit of all of those assets while you're alive until your death. If we want to move on to different types of trust, the really interesting is discretionary versus directed trusts.
Yep.
And so the directed trust, South Dakota has actually really done a great job in recent years of beefing up their directed trust laws. Directed trusts are let's start with discretionary. Discretionary trusts are when the trustee follows the trust document, but has some discretion, some ability to say yes and no to different requests, depending on what the recipe of the trust says. And so let's say that a beneficiary comes to us and says, I would like to get married and I want $100,000 to do this. Okay, well, depending on the size of the trust, we may look at it depending on what the situation is, who the remainder beneficiaries are, which are the beneficiaries after the current beneficiary. We may come up with a budget and say, given that the trust level is at $1 million, does it make sense to spend a tenth of that on the wedding? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it's a conversation. And ultimately, if we have discretion, we make the call on if that's a wise decision or not. The directed trust has different players put into place. And so there can be a person who's in the place of being the advisor, the trust protector. A family advisor is another role that can be in there, the distribution director, the investment director, and they each have a different role that they play within the trust. So the investment director can tell us, we want you to use Morgan Stanley or Fidelity to manage the money. The distribution director can tell us, send $100,000 to this beneficiary. They take the fiduciary responsibility. We don't even necessarily make a decision on it. They are the ones that are telling us what to do. So we're like an order taker in that case. And the trust protector, that person can have a number of different roles. They can be the person in place to remove trustees or add trustees. They can change the roles around. It's usually the trust document kind of details out what the trust protector is able to do. But what the directed trust can really offer families, and we see this a lot of times with closely held family businesses, is they can still be really hands-on with what's going on inside of the trust because they have selected these different roles, which are a lot of times trusted advisors in their lives. They can be their business associates or different family members. It needs to be enough of a step away from them. They can't play those roles, but it offers them a little bit more control. And along with
in some ways, they have their surrogates in place who are advising them on that asset.
Exactly. And then what that does is it takes some of the fiduciary responsibility off of the trustee. And so with that can come a lower fee for the trustee because, we would not be taking on the fiduciary responsibility for that.
Yep. That makes sense. So if I think about the different trustees involved, trust company versus family trustee versus friend advisor, let's talk about that distinction and why this is, and I want to be clear for everybody that this is not a pitch for Expedition or anything else. I want everyone to understand these differences, and Mindy's in a perfect place to explain them. So help me understand the difference between sort of that corporate versus a family member, which is often the case, or an advisor.
Yeah, and I mean, there is a big case to be made for having a family member serve as trustee, having an individual. If there are certain situations where you may have the perfect person in mind who, and we like to say that it's like, there's three components that's the perfect person. Someone who knows what they're doing, who can handle the job, who has the time to do it because it can be very time consuming, and who doesn't want to be paid. And so if you have someone who meets those three criteria, that's actually that is a great thing. And there's nothing wrong with having that person in place. what we see, because we are in the business, is that a lot of times those three components are not in place. And even if you do have those three components, I'm thinking about one client that we had come a couple of years ago who said it's really difficult to be trustee to someone that you love.
Mm.
Within a family, when you are the one that's serving as trustee, it can be that role of holding the purse strings that is just not a comfortable position for an aunt or an uncle or a sibling, or it's or even a parent. It can
Yep.
be really challenging, and it can muddy family relationships. um, there's
Mindy, it's the parallel that I often kind of describe around this is, when a family member has to make a difficult decision about who's next in line in a
yes.
family business, that's a lot of weight. That's a lot of pressure. However, if you have a board of directors with independent directors on there,
Mhm.
they can carry some of that burden and sort of maintain family harmony while also making
Mhm.
right decision. So you're really serving in that role.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Josh, that we have a lot of situations. Like, I would say most of our clients still want to advise us on the situation, the family relationship. We have so many meetings. We like to call situations where we are named as trustee after a person dies. We are just meeting with the families. We're not serving as trustee or co-trustee yet. We're not taking a fee. We just meet with these families or just with the grantor, but we like to get to know the beneficiaries as well over the course of years. And we take notes on how everyone's doing. What are the issues that are arising? Different personality things that will help us do our job better when the time comes. And I told one aunt recently, I said, you are helping me step into your shoes when the time comes. And she said, that's exactly what I want. I want you to be able to step in and do what I've been doing when I can no longer do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I can no longer do it is pretty soon, because people, like I said, like they're just tired of playing that role. They just want to go out to lunch with their family member without talking about the trust. Um, so
You
we really,
really become a psychologist in addition to a
oh
trust
yes.
officer to understand what's going on with this person, the dynamic, the
Mhm.
family, their level of responsibility around those assets, and are we making a good decision for this individual in
Absolutely.
distributing money or following
Yeah,
instructions?
yeah, and we do what we always try to do is try to come at it as like a collaborative approach of
Mhm.
saying, let's help the beneficiary understand the situation. Let's, like, whether it's hard numbers on a spreadsheet with graphs that show if you spend this much of the, let's say 4% of the trust each year, this is what's going to happen, and the money is going to actually last for a really long time and maybe even be there for the next generation as well. Um, and, sometimes we approach it like that. And sometimes we just approach things as, I mean, we get into career counseling, we get into, and we try to stay away from too much, marriage counseling or relationship,
That's
just
a
too
good
in
idea.
depth. But we can pass them on to the people that they need to talk to. We can give advice and say, do you know what? This seems to maybe, we always say this, a lot of times it's not a money issue, it's a relationship issue. And so we can sometimes have that really close relationship with beneficiaries and counsel them. And it's funny you say about psychologists. We've all said in the office that, we do a lot of psychology with our job. And some of our beneficiaries are like phenomenal in the finance field. They understand the investments. They don't need help budgeting. They are fully self sufficient. And us trying to give them advice in that realm would be offensive. And so we read the room. We make sure that we're meeting everyone where they are and what their needs are. Um, but to go back to your original question of, there's the individual trustee, so there's the family member, there's also the attorney option. Some people, want their attorney, and that's kind of the way I feel like it used to be done for a little while. And attorneys are coming to us saying, please, will you take this business? They don't want to be, most of them do not want to be in that business anymore, for a variety of reasons. So we're seeing less and less of that. But if you do have a personal attorney that you're close with, I mean, that could be a good choice as well. And then when you're in the corporate trustee realm, there are so many different varieties and flavors of what that can look like. There's the big banks that serve as both trustee and investment advisor. So they will serve as trustee as well as manage, the money or the assets that are in the trust.
Mhm.
A lot of times they will only take, marketable securities or cash kind of situations. They don't a lot of times like the alternative assets like real estate or businesses. But you can find some exceptions to that as well. And, you know, and then there are the mid-range kind of like companies, and then there are the very small ones. We're somewhere in the middle. Not from assets. We have clients who have, significant assets held in trust. But we are a 6-person firm. Like I said, we have 3 out in South Dakota and 3 here in Charlottesville. And we pick up our phones. So in that case, we are not one of the large trust companies. That my clients have my direct number, and I pick up my phone. There's no phone tree. There's no extensions. And a lot of them actually have my cell phone number also. So
Hence the psychology and being that ear that people need from time to time.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So if we think about families, and I'm going to use the example of just working with a trust company or a corporate trustee, what are some of the common misunderstandings that they have going into that relationship that you need to advise them on?
That's a great question. Um, you know, I think sometimes it really actually goes back to psychology. A lot of times people think that because the trustee is there in place, that we are trying to keep them from their money, that we are trying to control the situation.
Yeah.
Not everyone thinks that, but that's a misconception that we have to kind of break down just from the beginning. Um, Going back to the letter analogy, we're the post office. This is not our money. We're not trying to keep it. It helps that we don't manage the money because we don't have an incentive to keep as much money in the trust as possible. We're happy to make the distributions when the trust will allow for it. And actually, we look for ways to make the distribution if we really believe that this is the right thing to do, but the trust document is, a little bit foggy on it. We work really hard to try to make sure that we're doing right by the beneficiary and by the grantor's intents. Um, so that's one thing that we definitely try to do. Um, I think people with estate planning are always kind of struggling between the two of, do I want to rule from the grave? Do I want to have very specific things in place to make sure that I can cover every single possibility after I'm gone? Or do I trust my trustee? Am I going to make a trust that is just going to have, some general guidelines in it? And one thing that we can talk about more in depth if you want to, one thing that we really try to do with our clients is ask them to write a letter of wishes.
Hmm.
Um, it is not a legally binding document, but it basically can outline, hey, this is what I meant when I said I want this trust to pay for education. I don't want the trustee to pay for degree after degree after degree with this person never getting a job or becoming a contributing member of society. Um, or
So
gosh, I
Mindy,
think
Mindy, you're saying this is or is not it's not a legally binding document. However, it provides the trustee the guidance on the
yes,
intent, and they can go back to that letter of wishes
yes,
when the beneficiary is saying, "Hey, I want another PhD,
yeah.
pay up."
Yes, exactly. And we can say, this is actually what grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, this is what they had in mind when they
Yeah.
created this trust for your benefit. And so this is why we're going to encourage you to, okay, so you want to go back to school. Tell us about that path. Tell us why you're excited about this degree. And how do you think, that's going to launch you into doing something? And so we can provide that kind of guidance. And it's not, like I said, it's not legally binding because if you put every single thing that you're thinking in your trust document, I can't even imagine your legal bills as you change your mind over the course of your life.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, and it can actually tie the trustees' hands in ways that you may not anticipate or even intend. And
No question.
so, yeah, exactly. So it's good to have, some guidance in the trust document, but we love the letter of wishes because also some things can be a little bit hurtful to some beneficiaries when you look at the trust and you're like, well, why did they do this? Did they not trust me, or why do they treat me and my sibling differently?
Yep.
What's the intention here? And we've gotten some beautiful letters of wishes that the grantors have said, do not share this until I am gone. Sometimes it's actually written to the beneficiary. Sometimes it's written to the trustee to give us guidance. But we're big fans of those, and that can really break down a lot of
Yeah.
misconceptions and problems that people have, and it can explain things really well.
Mindy, well, it's not a legally binding document. Can anyone just sit down and begin to draft their own letter of wishes on this and include it in their file and they're good? Because this is,
Absolutely.
frankly, I have not, I don't have one of those.
Yes.
And I think it's important that my wife and I go through that exercise.
I absolutely recommend doing this for anyone because I think
Yeah.
there's, you know, none of us knows how long we're going to live, and these discussions are always a little bit delicate. Um, but there's a lot of, family traditions. There's some family values that we all hope to instill in the next generation. And I think all of us have seen families where that hasn't happened, where, there's a generation who was so hardworking, who, started from nothing and made it into something. And to pass on that that kind of value as a family, as well as passing on assets and wealth married together, is a real challenge. And I think that's what gets me excited. One of the things that gets me excited about my work, and you probably see that a lot too with your work, um, to be able to make that, transition to the second and to the third and ongoing generations. A letter of wishes can really not solve the problem, but it can really be a great guiding force.
Hmm. Yes, 100%, and I love that. And um, one, while you were talking, and something that came to mind that recently came up in a conversation are slats. I'm going to jump back to trust for a second, and
Mhm.
being able to access funds while also having a trust in place.
Mhm.
Can you talk about some of those tools?
Yeah. So there are so many different tools of, what the different, so
Yeah.
many different trusts that can be in place. And um, you know a lot of our attorneys will use slats for, it's the spousal lifetime trust that can help the couples have access to their assets, but keep them out of your taxable estate. And so, these types of tools are just one of many different things that your attorney can
Yeah.
help you create to put in place for your estate planning.
Mindy, when do people typically tee up their trusts? If I'm
Mhm.
a high net worth individual, when do I sort of put these in place? When should I be thinking about this? Is
Yeah.
this, obviously you don't want to do it in the 11th hour, but like walk me
Right.
through the sequencing that you see from different
Yeah.
families.
Absolutely. Well, there's timing is always interesting because people a lot of times don't want to do these until they feel like, gosh, I'm looking at my mortality in the face, and I don't have my estate planning in place. But we like to say there's no time like the present. um, you know People are waiting for a lifetime event to do their estate planning, and that can be a really good tool. It can be at a birth of a child. It can be when you have a think about having a closely held business that might be having some sort of event. Well, getting those assets into a trust before an event that makes the value go up by a large amount is a really great idea because you kind of lock in that cost basis amount. Um, so we always like to say, like, why not do it now? Especially if you're a high net worth individual, like, don't wait until you are staring a big event in the face. Also, a lot of estate planning attorneys have a big backlog, so reaching out to them in advance is a really good idea.
Now,
Um,
do it
yeah,
now.
absolutely, do it now, exactly. And so we see people, very young, like you, Josh, coming into the office and starting to make these plans. And then we do see people who are scrambling at the end, who are realizing that they didn't have this in place and they need to. So this timing is all over the place, but definitely before you're having some kind of big event that's going to increase the value of your assets is a very wise idea.
Yep. Good. Mindy, any final advice for everybody? You see a lot of families, you see a lot of things that go right and go wrong. What advice would
Yes.
you give to everybody?
Yeah. I would say I would say that love your people well by setting these documents in order,
Yeah.
and then live your life. You know, the analogy of, like, if you take an umbrella with you, it's not going to rain. We always say, get your estate in order, get these documents in place, and then go live your life and love your family. Because at the end of the day, this money can be a great tool to help you do a lot of great things in the world. It's wonderful when it can be passed down to generation in a really thoughtful way that allows people to thrive and to be contributing members of society. And it can also really hurt people. And so to be able to be thoughtful about how you are passing on your wealth and why you are passing on your wealth in the way that you are. And I just want to put a plug in for charitable giving too. Being really thoughtful about how you want to bring in philanthropy into your own giving as well as into your family culture is a wonderful thing to do. When our kids were younger, we didn't tell them what the pot of money was, but we did tell them, we have some money to give out. We want you all to be part of the process. And so we give them a list of charities that we thought were important. And then they each went off and did their own research. I mean, they were in elementary school when they did this, and they did little PowerPoint presentations and came back, and then the whole family voted on what percentage should go to each charity, and then mom and dad made the donations. um, there can be really, really great ways to establish a culture within your family of philanthropy, of, what can you do with the opportunities that you have because of the situation that you've been born into, or the ways that, your family has worked really hard and had some great opportunities. And so, I get excited when I see people being really thoughtful about this. And it's we have a lot of fun here working with a variety of different families, and we're always open to giving more advice. If there's ever, like, Trust 201, where one of my colleagues, Phil Garland, is an attorney, and
Yeah.
he can do a deep dive on all the different types of trusts,
Love it.
and we love to give advice. So it's a fun topic.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you all for joining us here at Family.Inc. Really appreciate your time, Mindy. I would encourage everyone to check out our website at Family.Inc. for more interviews, resources focused on enterprising families. Additionally, after this conversation, you're going to receive an email asking for feedback. We'd love you to participate because it helps us direct the content that we're creating. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks, Josh.